Welcome to the first episode of our show, Pakistan, a Hard Country, where we delve into the complex realities of Pakistan through the lens of Anatol Lieven's thought-provoking book.
It really is a challenging book,
Right.
in a good way. Makes you think.
Definitely. If you've ever felt like understanding Pakistan is like trying to piece together a puzzle with constantly shifting pieces, Lieven's book offers a crucial framework.
Mm-hmm.
And in this deep dive, we're focusing right at the beginning, pages 1 through 17.
Just the opening section, yeah. But it sets up so much.
Exactly. Our mission for you, listening, is to extract the foundational elements Lieven lays out. The enduring power structures, the historical baggage, and the unique social dynamics.
The things you really need to grasp before diving deeper.
Precisely. To understand why it is, as the title says, a hard country.
And it's quite striking how much he packs into those first pages. He starts with acknowledgments, which might seem standard.
Right, thanking people.
But look who he thanks. Officers from ISPR, the military's PR wing people from the High Commission in London, influential figures in Quetta.
It shows the breadth, doesn't it? He's talking to a lot of different people, different levels.
Straight away, you get a sense of the access he had, not just academic sources.
And then almost immediately he hits you with this list of abbreviations.
Yeah, GEM, JI, DID, JUI, FT, MI. It's a bit daunting at first glance.
Like GEM, Jaish-e-Mohammed, focusing on Kashmir. Or JI, Jamaat Islami, the political party.
What does that signal, putting that right up front?
Well, it tells you these aren't just background noise. These groups, political, religious, militant, intelligence, like MI, they're active players.
Essential players. You can't understand the dynamics without knowing who they are and sort of what they represent. It's like a key or legend for the map he's about to draw.
Okay, so map legend established. Then he dives straight into arguably the most powerful institution, the military.
And his description is formidable. Discipline, unity. That's the core assertion.
But he adds a crucial nuance, doesn't he? It's not unbreakable.
Right. It's not about battlefield defeat, necessarily.
Yeah.
He argues only extreme moral and emotional pressure could fracture it.
That conflict between duty to Pakistan, Islamic honor, versus obeying orders.
Exactly, that internal conflict.
And he paints this really stark scenario, a U.S. invasion, but one where the army doesn't resist.
Yeah. That, he suggests, could be a trigger, especially among Pathan soldiers.
But leading to what? Not a unified Iranian-style revolution?
No. State collapse, civil war, fragmentation along existing fault lines.
Why that specific outcome?
He links it to this undercurrent, this resentment within the ranks about perceived Pakistani subservience to the U.S.
That feeling of compromised sovereignty?
So an unopposed invasion could just shatter the whole thing rather than unify it against the external enemy.
Which then leads him to Pakistan's strategic thinking, particularly regarding Afghanistan.
Yeah, this hope, this calculation maybe, that helping the U.S. against the Afghan Taliban would pay dividends.
Specifically, getting U.S. pressure on India over Kashmir.
But that hope, Lieven says, has largely faded. There's a feeling the U.S. wasn't willing, or maybe even tilted towards India.
A sense of betrayal, almost.
Definitely a sense of being let down, of strategic miscalculation, perhaps.
And this ties back to the military's internal dynamics, too, because popular sentiment is also a factor here.
A huge factor. Lieven argues that Pakistan's ability to act against the Afghan Taliban was always limited by how people within Pakistan felt.
Especially in the communities where soldiers come from.
Right. Many there apparently see the Afghan Taliban's fight against foreign occupation as, well, legitimate.
Echoing their own history, like the fight against the Soviets in the 80s.
Exactly that parallel. That narrative of resisting foreign invaders is powerful. So the government couldn't be seen to be too helpful to the West against them. It sets real limits.
Okay, so we have the military, the strategic calculations. Then Lieven shifts focus to something more fundamental, perhaps. Kinship.
Ah, yes, the language of kinship. He says it permeates almost everything in Pakistan and much of South Asia.
It's more than just family trees, right? It's about affection, responsibility, favors, protection.
It's like a code. How you interact, who you owe, who owes you, even with non-relatives.
He gives that example, Pai Sahib, Brother Lord.
Yeah, that captures it perfectly. Kinship, democracy, hierarchy, all mixed together in one term of address. It's complex.
And cousin marriage gets a mention, too, as a symbol of obligation, honor, keeping those ties strong.
Absolutely. It's a tangible sign of commitment to the kin group.
Now, this focus on kinship, It has political consequences. Lieven credits these local kinship groups with providing stability.
Paradoxically, yes. Below the surface of changing governments in Islamabad, at the local level, the same families, the same networks often stay influential. They provide continuity.
But there's a downside, a significant one.
Oh, definitely. This same power of kinship contributes to what he calls a predatory state.
Meaning groups use their connections, their influence within the state, to benefit themselves.
Precisely. It fosters a system where who you know can often trump rules or merit.
And he connects this directly to corruption in the legal system, below the high courts anyway.
Yeah, outcomes based on influence, not facts or law. It's a stark assessment of how kinship networks can undermine formal institutions.
This really leads into his point about imposing external models, Western models, onto Pakistan.
He's quite skeptical. Suggests it's unlikely to work if it's radical or ignores the inherent nature of the society.
Change needs to be slow, incremental, organic.
Aligned with Pakistan's own character, is how he puts it. Which brings him to this idea of Pakistan as a negotiated state.
Negotiated. What does that mean exactly?
That different regimes, military, civilian, have constantly tried to reshape the country, drawing on different inspirations.
Like Ataturk secularism for Ayub Khan or Musharraf.
Or a stricter Islam under Zia-ul-Haq, or Bhutto's populism, all mixed with Pakistani nationalism. It's never static. It's always being renegotiated, adapted.
Looking ahead, Lieven identifies some really big long-term threats, not just political instability.
No, he points to something more fundamental, the Indus River.
Yeah.
Water.
And climate change, water shortages, infrastructure, population growth.
He argues these are perhaps the greatest long-term dangers to Pakistan's stability. Basic resource pressures.
That's sobering. And economically, he challenges a common perception.
Right. That Pakistan is primarily rural.
But the figures he cites for 2009 show agriculture was only about 20% of GDP. Services and industry were much larger.
Services being mostly informal, small businesses, transport, that kind of thing. Industry around 26%.
But crucially, about 60% of people still lived in the countryside.
Which explains the continued power of those rural elites, those kinship networks we talked about. Economic output versus population location.
Though he does offer a sliver of hope regarding the state's capacity.
Yeah, he suggests the state can execute big projects successfully, like dams, historically, or more recently, the Gwadar port and motorways.
How? By insulating them somewhat from the usual pressures and corruption.
That seems to be the implication, creating pockets of efficiency for nationally important goals.
Lieven also provides some historical context, going back to Muslim responses to British colonialism.
He outlines three broad tendencies. There was religious renewal and resistance, tracing back to figures like Shah Waliullah.
Then the push for modern education and reform, like Sir Syed Ahmed Khan.
And then the third way, the pragmatic approach of the majority, including many local elites, basically, work within the British system, get benefits, but react if Muslim identity felt threatened.
So no single response. Diverse paths even then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes local factors led to specific armed revolts, especially among Pathans or the Hurs in Sindh. It wasn't monolithic.
And speaking of historical visions, he includes that quote from Jinnah.
That's a really interesting one, suggesting a vision for Pakistan as Muslim majority, yes, but essentially secular in governance.
With minorities having a share of power and staying connected culturally, economically to a wider South Asia, even a confederation.
It's quite a different picture from some later interpretations, focusing more on civic nationalism and regional ties. It shows the evolution of the idea of Pakistan.
Then the tone shifts quite dramatically to the loss of Bangladesh in 1971.
A catastrophe, as Lieven puts it, particularly for West Pakistanis. The military campaign, Operation Searchlight, a terrible blot, fueled by racial contempt for Bengalis.
And the loss itself questioned the whole two-nation theory, the meaning of Pakistan.
A profound identity crisis. But Lieven adds another perspective, doesn't he?
He does. He argues that while the circumstances were catastrophic, the separation itself might have been inevitable.
And, controversially perhaps, he suggests it left West Pakistan as a more coherent state geographically, ethnically, culturally.
Which he argues contributed to its resilience later on.
It's a complex take on a deeply traumatic event.
Moving towards the state of politics, Lieven is quite critical of the main political parties.
Yeah, with a couple of exceptions like Jamaat Islami and MQM, he paints most democratic parties as collections of, well, patrons.
Landlords, clan chiefs, urban bosses, all seeking patronage, with leadership often inherited.
That's the picture. Less about ideology or mass mobilization, more about networks of influence and distributing state resources. Makes building disciplined parties hard.
He mentions Zulfikar Ali Bhutto trying, but failing, to create a real vast party.
And ending up with local PPP leaders becoming powerful figures in their own right, fighting turf battles.
So Bhutto resorted to using state control, bending the bureaucracy, the judiciary.
Yes, which created intense hatred, Lieven notes. But even then, the police were seen as unreliable for mass repression. Brutality tempered by torpor is the phrase he uses.
Wow, and Bhutto's special security force, the FSF.
Not strong enough to control everything, but enough to generate real fear and resentment among the elite.
Then comes General Zia-ul Haq, a major shift.
Declaring Pakistan an Islamic state, reversing earlier secularizing moves, extending some of Bhutto's Islamizing policies, but with a different goal.
Oh, so?
Lieven sees Zia's Islamization as primarily top-down, using Sharia law's disciplinary aspects to strengthen state power.
But not necessarily focusing on Islamic ideas of social justice or welfare.
Largely absent, he argues, due to Zia's authoritarian mindset. It was more about control and order through a specific interpretation of religious law.
Which brings us back to the justice system, the state one at least. Lieven sees it as deeply flawed.
And not just flawed, but actively manipulated. He argues that while the masses are victims, anyone with any power often tries to bend the system for their own ends.
Driven by constant power struggles, lack of trust.
Exactly. And adding to the problem is the perception of the state law itself.
As an imposed British system, not organically Pakistani.
Right. Unlike English law in England, rooted in centuries of history, this system feels somewhat alien, undermining its legitimacy.
And it faces competition from traditional local practices, rivas, and from Sharia law.
Which helps explain, for instance, the Taliban's appeal. In some Pathan areas, they blended Sharia with local Pashtunwali traditions.
Lieven also emphasizes something woven deeply into the culture. Honor.
Izzat, Garat.
Absolute fundamental concepts.
And often linked directly to violence, as a way to avenge insults, protect family prestige. Yes, defending honor, even violently, is often seen as necessary to maintain standing and prospects. It's a powerful social force.
Given the issues with the formal courts, what about informal systems? Jirgas.
He highlights their importance. Even though not officially recognized, tribal jirgas are frequently used, especially in rural areas like Sindh, to settle disputes.
Often with the government or police tacitly involved
Right.
to prevent escalation.
Yes, and he notes that even powerful feudal leaders often favor ending feuds, because ultimately, no one really wins.
There are even attempts to formalize this, like that initiative in NWFP to attach public committees to police stations.
Right. To regulate the jirga system, prevent illegal decisions, offer an alternative to the overburdened formal courts, which people often avoid anyway. They prefer compensation over jail time, often.
This all raises a really difficult question Lieven poses about democracy itself in Pakistan.
Yeah, is the problem too little democracy? Or maybe too much?
Too much. How so?
In the sense that the views of a less educated majority might overwhelm educated elites, or that the state is too weak to enforce its own laws against powerful local interests fostered by democratic competition.
He even cites historical European examples where progress was pushed by authoritarian elites. It's provocative.
It challenges easy assumptions about democracy always being the solution, or at least the only solution, to governance problems. It points to the need for state capacity, too.
And state capacity is clearly an issue with the police force.
Huge issues. Kinship, ties, again, making it hard to arrest someone if they have connections, worrying about repercussions.
Plus widespread bribery. People just avoid the police if they can.
That anecdote about the investigator in Peshawar, his blank look when asked if torture might decrease after Musharraf. It says a lot about the disconnect between reforms announced at the top and reality on the ground.
But again, a counterexample, the National Motorway Police.
Presented as a positive case. Better pay, central command, insulation from local politics, fostering pride, showing it is possible to have effective policing.
The legal system's dysfunction isn't just about corruption, though. It's also about process.
Yes, those endless adjournments, caused by everything from logistics to deliberate delays, influence, intimidation, just a general lack of urgency.
And the system is massively overloaded.
Plus the language barrier trying to move to Urdu when so much relies on English precedents, and then ethnic sensitivities like Sindhis in Karachi potentially objecting. It's tangled.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, Lieven discusses radicalism. He notes a distinction.
Islamist radicalism, he argues, is primarily an urban phenomenon.
Rural areas can be stirred up by Islam and danger appeals, but only a couple of groups like sectarian extremists in Punjab or later the Taliban established a lasting rural base.
Generally, yes. He suggests land and Sunni elites often control local mosques and prevent radical parties from gaining traction in their areas.
And he looks at the roots of urban activism, using Jamaat Islami activists in Lahore as an example.
Lower middle-class backgrounds, family struggling, religion, and Jamaat discipline, offering a way to avoid slipping into crime. A social anchor.
But these Islamist parties face limits to their appeal, right?
Several limits. Their specific religious culture might feel alien to many Pakistanis, though that's changing with urbanization.
And they challenge deeply embedded structures, property, patronage, kinship, especially hereditary saints, peers.
They've also been outflanked, in a way, by more violent jihadis on one side and by more pragmatic Islamists drawn to state patronage under Zia or the Sharifs on the other.
And the culture of shrines and Sufism is still incredibly pervasive.
Hugely important. Even secular leaders use saintly imagery. PPP rallies feel like devotional festivals. Saints are part of military lore, even.
Though shrines have faced opposition, too.
From secular reformers seeing superstition, and from nationalists worried about loyalty to local peers undermining loyalty to the state. Ataturk in Turkey is an example.
And the British actually co-opted peer families, didn't they? Saw them as useful for stability.
Exactly. They incorporated them into their system of rule.
Lieven then brings in a Jamaat student activist voice. What's their main motivation?
Opposition to feudalism. That's the key term they use, meaning control by landowners and their business allies.
Contrasting Jamaat with other parties where those claiming to want change are often part of that same system.
Right. They advocate for student unions, trade unions, NGOs, trying to build new democratic structures free from those old feudal and dynastic ties.
Then there's that other student voice, expressing extreme anti-Americanism.
Yeah, blaming the U.S. for terrorist attacks, fearing the U.S. more than the Pakistani Taliban. It highlights a specific, potent strand of public opinion.
Seeing the U.S. presence in Afghanistan as the root cause of Pakistan's problems.
Yeah. And finally, Lieven touches on Jamaat's own stance towards violent militants.
Cautious, ambivalent.
Seems like it. Likely reflecting internal debates and worry about losing radical supporters. He mentions Abdul Rashid Ghazi of the Red Mosque siege had Jamaat ties, left calling them cowards, but his style was similar. Shows the potential overlap.
Okay, that was a whirlwind tour through just the initial pages of Lieven's work. We've definitely covered a lot of ground.
We really have. And even just from this opening section, you get a powerful sense of the core themes.
Key takeaways for me are the absolute centrality and complexity of the military.
The tangled relationship with Afghanistan, driven by both strategy and deep-seated public feeling.
The overwhelming influence of kinship, for better and for worse.
The difficulty of imposing outside solutions, the idea of the negotiated state, and just how much history and culture weigh on the present.
These opening pages really do lay the foundation for understanding Pakistan's fragility, yes, but also its strange kind of resilience. It's navigating so many internal and external pressures.
So, as you've been listening, think about what stands out most to you from Lieven's initial framing. Which aspect of Pakistani society or politics are you most curious about now?
Yeah, what do you want to understand more deeply as we continue this exploration?
This first dive into Pakistan, a hard country, really just gives us a glimpse of the intricate picture Lieven paints. It definitely invites you to keep exploring.
Absolutely. Consider how these foundational themes, the military, kinship, history, the negotiated state, how might they play out in specific regions or specific crises that Lieven tackles later in the book? Something to think about.